A very good evening, good morning. I don't know how I should describe this time because it's close to midnight, and I have to apologize for waking some of you up and for disturbing some of you who may be winding down with your day. But we had a very important news break that concerns the entire Air India crash safety report. And as some of you may know, today has been a day when India's aviation regulator, the DGCA, has actually ordered that all fuel control switches on Boeing aircrafts should be inspected across India. This after the crash report flagged a 2018 advisory that spoke about a possible locking mechanism issue in these fuel control switches. This DGCA decision followed what other airlines across the world, including Etihad, South Korea, and Singapore, had decided to do, even as Boeing insisted that its fuel control switches were safe. But we have another really important news point to show you, and I'm just going to bring this up now on the screen for you. And there it is. I'm hoping that you can see it. I know I'm small in the window, but I think it's really important that all of you are able to see what I'm showing you on your screen. Look at it carefully and look at the date on it, right? The date on it is the 15th of May 2025. Now, this is a mandatory safety notice that has been issued by the United Kingdom's aviation regulator. Why is this important? Because once again, look at the date on it. The date on it is 15th May 2025. That's less than 4 weeks before the 787 Air India 171 crashes 32 seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad. It was bound, of course, for Gatwick in London. Now, what is this particular directive saying? This particular directive is talking about a potential unsafe condition affecting fuel shutoff valves. This is what the United Kingdom is flagging on the 15th of May, under 4 weeks before, the Air India crash takes place in Ahmedabad. Now, I just want to be very clear so that people are not actually confused. And I'm going to read out the details of this particular notice in just a moment from now. The Air India preliminary investigation crash report actually flagged an advisory that was issued by the FAA. That was in 2018. And that advisory pertained to the fuel control switches. The fuel control switches are now everywhere in the headlines. As I mentioned, they're now being checked in India, across the world, and so on. What we're talking about now, not an advisory, but in fact a directive, and the difference between the two is an advisory is, it's up to the airline how it processes that information, but a directive is a mandatory instruction to airlines to look at this particular issue. And this is a different component of the plane that is being flagged. This relates to fuel valves, but fuel valves are in fact controlled by the fuel switches. And as one pilot said to me, they're like a faucet for the fuel, a conduit, as it were, for the fuel to flow smoothly to the engines. Now, we know at this point that it was about 3 seconds after takeoff, 3 seconds after the takeoff of Air India 171, that actually fuel was cut to the engines, right? This is something that we now know, and it led to these horrific images that we've all seen. This plane takes off, and 3 seconds after that, the fuel is cut to its engines. And we've all been sort of obsessed and fixated on the fuel control switches because the preliminary crash report informs us that the fuel control switches, which were in run mode, transitioned. I'm quoting the investigation report here. Transitioned mysteriously 3 seconds into the flight into the cutoff mode, thereby cutting fuel to the engines. Now, The crash report also quotes a conversation in the cockpit where pilot one says to pilot two, "Why did you do that?" And pilot two says, "I didn't do it." And the 2018 advisory has come into a lot of scrutiny because that particular advisory spoke about possible problems with locking the fuel control switches. In other words, people are wondering, maybe the pilots locked the fuel switches on run mode and they slipped to cut mode. We know that 10 seconds later, the switches are brought back to run mode again. The engines, that the pilots try to revive the engines. Engine one revives, engine two doesn't, but the plane hasn't gained altitude. Maybe if it had, it wouldn't have crashed into a building and we wouldn't have been in this situation. But the exclusive news break that we have for you now pertains to a different component of the plane. And Mojo Story has exclusively accessed a UK issued safety directive on fuel valves. This directive was issued on the 15th of May, just less than 4 weeks before the Air India 17 crash. And here's what it actually says. It talks about a potentially unsafe condition affecting the fuel shutoff valves. The irony is that this mandatory directive from the United Kingdom is actually quoting the FAA, the American Aviation Regulation. And let me, at this point, read out to you exactly what it says, right? Exactly what it says. Here it is, and I'm just going to, maybe I can actually even zoom in on this for you so we can read it out straight from here. So here it says that the FAA has issued an airworthiness directive addressing a potential unsafe condition affecting fuel shut-off valves installed on the following Boeing aircraft: 737, 757, 767, 777, which require a test and an inspection, and on the fuel shut-off valve actuators on the 787, which require replacement test and or inspection, right? So look at it. This is really important. We have a situation where the UK aviation regulator is talking about a whole range of Boeing aircraft. These include the 777, the 757, the 737, but also the 787. And when it actually talks about the 787, it actually says that when it comes to the 787, there is a potential safety concern with the fuel shutoff valve actuators on the 787, which require replacement test and or inspection, right? So here's what the UK directive in May 2025, 4 weeks before the Air India crash, in fact less than 4 weeks, because the crash takes place on 12th June 2025, is talking about possible replacement test and or, let's read out this point, and or inspection of fuel valves on 787s. Now, let me in fact be precise and read this out to you again. The FAA has issued an airworthiness directive addressing a potential unsafe condition affecting fuel shutoff valves installed on the following Boeing aircraft: 737, 757, 767, 777, which require a test on and or an inspection, and on the fuel shutoff valve actuators. The fuel shutoff valve actuators, let me write that, fuel shutoff valve actuators, right? Actuators on the 787, right? Now, in fact, the 787, the directive for the 787 goes one step further. It goes one step further than the suggestion or the instruction for the other planes. It says that when it comes to the 787, there is a need to look at a possible replacement. Let me read that out again. Yeah, which may require a replacement test and or inspection, right? So let's go through what we know again. So far, here's what we know. We know that in 2018, the American Aviation Regulator, the FAA, issued an advisory, not a mandatory directive, and it spoke about a possible locking mechanism with the fuel control switches. This has been revealed by the Air India crash report. It talks about the FAA advisory, and it says that this was not really followed up seriously because it was an advisory and it was not a mandatory directive. So it lay buried somewhere. In fact, most pilots I've spoken to didn't even know about it. What we're telling you today, on a day when the DGCA, the Indian Aviation Regulator, has actually mandated that these fuel control switches be checked on all Boeing aircraft, and it has followed airlines across the world in doing this, Etihad, South Korea, Singapore Airlines. We're giving you a different piece of news. We have accessed a safety directive. A directive is different from an advisory because it's an actual instruction. This has been issued on the 15th of May by the UK Aviation Regulator. This is just 4 weeks before the Air India 171 crash. And the UK regulator is flagging a potential safety concern. The exact sentence that it uses is that there could be a potential unsafe condition affecting fuel shutoff valves. A potential unsafe condition affecting fuel shutoff valves. This is what the UK Aviation Regulator is saying for a whole range of Boeing planes, including the triple seven, the seven. Let me look at this. Let's zoom in here and say, yeah, 777, the 737, the 757, and also the 787. And for the 787, what it actually says is to look at any need for replacement, test, and inspection of fuel shutoff valve actuators. So it goes one step further when it comes to the 787. So, the entire focus on the 2018 FAA advisory led to the fuel control switches being now mandatorily tested across Boeing aircraft in India as well as across the world. And now here we have another component that was flagged, the potential safety of which was flagged. And these are called the fuel valves. As it has been explained to me, the fuel valves are also controlled by the fuel control switches, which are currently in the global headlines. And what it actually says, this directive, is that there's a potential unsafe condition affecting the fuel shutoff valves. This directive cites the FAA. It cites the FAA, the American Aviation Regulator, and it is issued just 4 weeks before the Air India 171 crash goes down. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to make a causal link between this directive and the crash. I am simply putting in the public domain information as it is coming to us about safety concerns related not just to the Dreamliner, but other Boeing aircraft, some in the form of advisories. We know, for example, that there was an advisory from GE, General Electric, which makes the engines of these planes. And that advisory came in 2020 that concerned a microprocessor, a microchip. In 2018, there was an FAA advisory that concerned the locking mechanisms of the fuel switches. This that we're showing you on the screen is a little bit different because it's an actual directive as opposed to an advisory, and therefore it's an actual instruction, just like the instruction from the DGCA today concerning testing the fuel switches. And for anyone who's just joining us, we are showing you that less than 4 weeks before Air India 171, the 787 Dreamliner crashed, 32 seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad, headed for Gatwick. And it has been flagged that the crash took place as a result of the report. The investigative preliminary report argues as a result of the fuel cutoff switches transitioning from run mode to cutoff mode. The report doesn't say how that happened. The report does quote a cockpit conversation between pilot 1 and pilot 2. Pilot 1 says, "Why did you do this?" Pilot 2 says, "I didn't do it." And the debate is carrying on how these fuel switches transition to cutoff mode. 10 seconds later, they brought back to run mode. But it's too late. The one engine relights, the other one doesn't. The plane hasn't gained altitude and it crashes. So again, I want to be very careful. I'm not trying to drive a causal link between this directive and what happened in Ahmedabad. I am simply flagging various safety concerns that surround Boeing aircraft. I think we all remember the Boeing 737 MAX. When the first crash with the Boeing 737 MAX took place, the Boeing company and a lot of the media blamed the pilots. One of the pilots then in the Lion Air was an Indian. It took, unfortunately, a second crash to take place before Boeing went back to the drawing board and admitted that the MCAS software that they'd used in the 737 MAX had created a problem, had created interference, and the pilots had not been briefed on the MCAS. The controversy with the 2018 advisory linked to the fuel control switches is similar. Because it was an advisory, most of the pilots or none of the pilots I've spoken to even knew about it. Now that it's in the news as a result of the Air India preliminary crash investigative report, DGCA is among regulators around the world that is instructing a mandatory inspection of these fuel control switches. But our news point, our news exclusive news break is different. It is bringing to you another safety concern that was flagged by UK and USA regulators, the FAA and the Civil Aviation Authority of the United Kingdom. And these concerned the fuel shutoff valves. And the exact language used in this directive is a potential unsafe condition affecting fuel shutoff valves. This is issued on the 15th of May 2025. AI 171 crashes on 12th of June 2025. Again, no causal links being drawn. I am simply placing in the public domain different concerns around safety and transparency when it comes to Boeing. And what did the UK directive specifically say when it came to the 787s? To look at a potential unsafe condition and to see if there's any requirement for a replacement test and or inspection of the fuel shutoff valve actuators on the 787. Now, it could be, of course, that these inspections were done in the United Kingdom, they were done in the United States of America, that no problem was found with them whatsoever. Again, not trying to draw a causal link between the crash of Air India 171 and this directive, but placing in the public domain that just 4 weeks before you have this horrific crash and the whole world is now debating, Boeing, and there are those who have pointed fingers at pilots, and they've been very prompt about giving a clean sheet to GE and Boeing. There are also these concerns, and some of these concerns were flagged under 4 weeks before Air India's crash. We'll have experts through Tuesday to take a look at this newest piece of news that we have accessed. But I thought it was important, even though it is now 15 minutes past midnight, to bring you this piece of news for all of you to process it. Some of you are experts, some of you are in the aviation community, some of you are lay people like me, some of you had families on board that aircraft, some of you have had families associated with previous crashes. Again, we're not here to slander anybody, smear anybody. We're simply placing the information as we're getting it in the public domain and letting the experts deconstruct it and debate it. We'll leave it there. Have a great night, and more on this through Tuesday on the Mojo Story. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.